Hey everyone, not for the first time, the left is very upset with Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Take a look at some of these headlines. I'm Rich Lowry of National Review. Now, Clarence Thomas gave a speech at the University of Texas last week that was wonderful about the Declaration of Independence. I think there's a good case that Clarence Thomas is the greatest living American. Incredible personal story, has had a huge impact on our national life, a man of courage and principle. Well, let's put that aside. Maybe a topic for a video on another day. But Thomas, in the course of this speech, portrayed progressivism as a clear and present danger to the truths of the Declaration of Independence and our constitutional system. This got, of course, progressives very upset. They say this is a partisan attack. It's unfair to progressives. It's historically illiterate. So who is correct? Well, I think as usual, it's Clarence Thomas, but let's delve into why. And here he is beginning to make his case in the course of the speech against progressivism.
At the beginning of the 20th century, a new set of first principles of government was introduced into the American mainstream. The proponents of this new set of first principles, most prominent among them, the 28th President of our country, Woodrow Wilson, called it progressivism. Since Wilson's presidency, progressivism has made many inroads into our system of government and our way of life. It has coexisted uneasily with the principles of the Declaration. Because it is opposed to those principles, it is not possible for the two to coexist forever.
So there Thomas is setting up Woodrow Wilson as the paladin of turn of the century American progressivism and describing how progressivism viewed the Constitution as a living document, as our constitutional system as something that was dated and needed to be moved beyond so history could progress into the sunny uplands. Then Thomas went on to make this point.
We were fortunate not to trade our lock-in bonds for the supposedly enlightened world of Hegel, Marx, and their followers. Fascism, which after all was National Socialism, triggered wars in Europe and Asia that killed tens of millions. The socialism of the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China proceeded to kill more tens of millions of their own people. This is what happens when natural rights give way to the higher good of notions of history, progress, or, as Thomas Sowell has written, the visions of the anointed.
Okay, so cue the outrage. Let's look at some of these headlines. SCOTUS blog, Justice Thomas's wrong-headed attack on progressivism. Salon, Clarence Thomas's attack on progressivism should alarm you. Daily Kos, Justice Thomas's vile, slanderous attack on progressivism shows just what we're up against. And the New Republic, Clarence Thomas just can't get American history right. Now, Clarence Thomas's case against Woodrow Wilson seems unassailable. He was impatient with traditional constitutional constraints on the federal government. He thought we should be governed by enlightened administrators and experts. He was a racist who resegregated the federal government. He supported eugenics. He suppressed dissent during World War I. So what is the progressive rejoinder to this case against Wilson? It's basically, Woodrow Wilson, we've never heard of the guy. Here's the New Republic. Thomas is correct that progressivism was introduced around the turn of the 20th century, that Woodrow Wilson was the 28th president, and that Wilson was a progressive. The historical accuracy ends there, though. Presenting Wilson as the inventor of progressivism is historically illiterate, akin to saying that Joseph Stalin invented communism or that Ronald Reagan invented conservatism. Salon has basically the same take. Thomas spent an inordinate amount of time lambasting Woodrow Wilson as progressivism's intellectual and spiritual leader, when I would guess that most people who identify as progressives today couldn't tell you when he was president, much less what he believed in. And if they do know who he was, they would almost certainly reject vast swaths of his philosophy. He was, after all, an unreconstructed racist and eugenicist, something Thomas seemed to suggest as a feature of progressivism, which could not be more wrong. None of this is particularly convincing. The New Republic says, hey, look, progressivism began before Woodrow Wilson came around. But Thomas isn't denying that. He's just saying that Wilson was extremely important and prominent and was president of the United States. Salon says, well, today progressives have forgotten about Wilson, or they've even turned their backs on him because he was such a terrible racist. Fine, no one's denying that either. It's just that was a very long time coming, and progressives spent decades and decades valorizing Woodrow Wilson because they recognized Wilson as one of their own. He created an aggrandized government that had leapt the traditional bounds that had limited the government prior to that. And FDR, still a great progressive hero, built on what Wilson had created the foundations for. So, yes, Wilson was a progressive pioneer. Let's not deny it. Now, the left also freaked out over the Thomas clip where he talked about fascism and Hitler and Stalin. Here was the Slate headline: Clarence Thomas just gave a speech blaming progressivism for Hitler. It was mostly just sad. Now, Thomas didn't blame progressivism for Hitler. He did say, it's not in the clip I showed earlier, but it's related to it. He did say that Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin were intertwined with progressivism. I might put it a little differently, that progressivism and these totalitarian movements partook of the spirit of the age that had impatience with any constraints on government power, believed in mass politics and corporatist policies and the like. But progressivism and totalitarianism are distinct phenomenon. But where Thomas is on totally unassailable ground, and none of his critics give him credit for this very tellingly, is that once you reject the Lockean foundations of the American system and no longer believe we have natural rights, no longer believe that anything is fixed, you believe in history marching forward with a capital H, there are no constraints on government power. So Wilson was not a Nazi, but there's a reason he supported racist policies or eugenics. He didn't feel that check from a Lockean understanding of the American system. This is why you get an 8-1 Supreme Court decision. Thomas cited this, Buck v. Bell, in his speech, 8-1 decision upholding a Virginia sterilization law, one of the most notorious decisions in the Supreme Court's history. Oliver Wendell Holmes, a progressive in good standing, wrote the opinion. One justice against it. One dissenter happened to be the traditional conservative. He was a guy named Pierce Butler. So he actually, in effect, ran a controlled experiment in real time, getting to the deeper point that Clarence Thomas was making here. On the one hand, we had Woodrow Wilson, again, active supporter of segregationists, eugenicists, jailed his opponents during World War I. And then, several years later, but same basic time frame, we have Calvin Coolidge, who gave one of the greatest, if not the greatest, speeches extolling the Declaration of Independence. Thomas quoted it with great effect in his University of Texas talk, who wasn't an active supporter of segregation, wasn't a eugenicist, wouldn't even occur to him to jail his political opponents, because he had Wilson unmoored to the American founding, thinking it's the past and we need to get beyond that small time thinking. And then you have Coolidge deeply tethered to the vision of the founding fathers. Now, Thomas is saying that Calvin Coolidge supported view is the ultimate protection of our rights, because if you have that view of natural rights, that view of the fixity of the Constitution, then you can't get fascism. You're not tempted to jail your political opponents. And he isn't saying at all that everyone on the left is a threat to our system of government. No, there are plenty of liberals who believe liberal things, who also believe deeply in our system of government and natural rights, and will stand up, for instance, for things like free speech. Progressivism as a philosophy is different. It believes in a so-called living constitution, just the way Woodrow Wilson did back in his day, which means, in effect, we don't have a constitution, or we only have a constitution when it's politically convenient. Otherwise, it's perfectly fine to work around it or to get judges to reinterpret it. And what Thomas is saying, it's a profound point, is once you've ceded that, once you believe that's how government can operate, in theory, there is no check on anything that government can do. He is totally right about that. Thank you, Justice Thomas, for a marvelous speech. I'm Rich Lowry, over and out.